So, Tina and Daniele, I'm going to start asking you first of all about how long you've been married and what were your thoughts and your dreams about having a family back then when you got married?
Thank you. We have been married 11 years.
She had to check with me
Congratulations.
before the podcast. Like,
I noticed,
that
I
now.
noticed.
We actually had to go, well, how long was it?
And but we've been together 21
Wow.
years. So yeah, we were together quite a bit before we got married, and actually we started trying for a family before we were married. So shall I do my hopes and dreams, and then
Yeah.
you can do talk about yours? I mean, ever since I was a young child, I always felt like my destiny, my purpose. For as young as I can remember, I always wanted to be a mother. Um, and I did my work experience in a nursery. I wanted to be a nanny, and they're the types of jobs that I was thinking about when I was younger, because I just
You love children.
loved children. And so I just couldn't imagine my life without children. And it wasn't something that we instantly talked about until we were quite far along in our relationship. But I think it got to the point for me, and when we started trying, I think I was in about 39, so in my late 30s. And I just knew that we just had to have those conversations. And so to be honest, the marriage wasn't that important to me, but actually family was.
And what about you, Daniele? Similar?
Um,
Or?
no, not really. To be honest, I wanted kids because Tina wanted kids. Um, I'm actually, we'll go on to it, but we have had a very good life. And so I think for me it was more what Tina wanted, and she wanted kids, and so therefore I wanted kids. So I don't think there was never a big kind of searching or need. It was more that what she needed, we needed.
All right. Makes sense. Happy wife, happy life, as some say. So then, um, how long into your how long into your relationship then? Because I know you were together for a long time beforehand, before you got married, and you've been married for a long time. How long did you then start to think that actually starting that family, having a family, might be an issue?
Well, I fell pregnant naturally to begin with, and I think we must have been probably trying for a year, maybe a year and a half. So I know that I was kind of in my early 40s by that point, and sadly miscarried at about 10 weeks. And I think at that point, I just felt that getting ourselves tested to understand, kind of where we were, would be the most sensible option, just because of, I did feel a time pressure, as lots of women will. And just to understand kind of where we were just seemed like the sensible thing to do. It's quite hard taking that step because you don't know what you're gonna, kind of the answers you're gonna receive. And I remember the fertility specialist, the doctor saying to us that if we were gonna, really stand any chance of becoming pregnant again, then we would need to go down the IVF route, which is kind of where we kind of started. When I felt ready. I think it was probably like another 8 months after the miscarriage, we then, in a privileged position where we could try IVF.
And can I ask if you like when you started that the IVF treatment, did you actually share, or did you open up to others around you at that time?
Yes, our immediate family and our very good friends knew that that we were going through IVF. The first time we went through it, I didn't tell work. I'd actually had been given a sabbatical. I'd been in the business for 10 years, so I took. It's a very, very short amount of time. I think I was given a month, so I took that time off to do the first round of IVF. But I wasn't, or we weren't public with everyone about it. It's more because there's so much expectation, on going through that process. I just didn't want everyone to know.
Yeah, of course.
More what to do with the questions that people ask you. So, at that point, we didn't tell everyone that we were going through it.
So you've already mentioned about the expectations of others. Have you, what kind of pressures did you have up at that point, or up until that point, from others around, even if it's friendship groups or families? Did you feel the pressure, and was there pressure on you, would you say?
There is pressure, and not necessarily, put on us by other people on purpose, but people do, of course. The natural thing to ask is how you're doing, and kind of at the time we had other things that were kind of going on in our lives that were quite difficult. So there was a lot that was happening to us that kind of did actually sort of take over the process. But I think it's definitely the questions, the drugs that you take and how that makes you feel. It can be a difficult process to go through, and then the added pressure of what is going to be the end result. It's just a really stressful process to go through.
I think the pressure's more societal, I would say. I don't think we necessarily had anyone. You see the movies where people could go, "Oh, when you're having next something," I never felt that kind of pressure from those around me. But I think it's just societal, and I think to a certain extent, when I said that thing about, I think we do have to live in a world where it isn't a default to have kids. So I totally appreciate, for Tina it was so important, but for me it was. I also understood that, that not having kids has to be an option as well, because at the moment it does feel like the pressure I see on Tina was also this societal pressure that said, as a woman you need to become a mother, and that's really hard.
Yeah, and I it's interesting that you mentioned about the societal pressure, and the reason why I mentioned about even the pressures around you, because even in my culture, and I don't know if it's a cultural thing, but I come from a Nigerian background, and it is normal, or it's usual for people to ask as soon as you've got married, so when's the kids, and then when you've even had a child, when's the next one? So there is a strong expectation from, could be family, extended family, or the culture that people are from, to even like bend towards that expectation and really feel it, as well as the societal pressure. Yeah, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I think
Like you mentioned.
it's 100% right, and I suppose, you know, when you're going through that process, it's stressful anyway, without you know, other people putting pressure on, and the expectation and stigma and shame that comes from, you know, even having an assisted pregnancy or IVF, or, you know, miscarriage, and the stigma and shame of not having children. I mean, that is what affected me for so long, you know, for many years. And you know, and so, yes, I mean, massively, I think you are 100% right. And there's lots of kind of cultures that expect that, and you know, yeah, there's stigma and shame around it.
And Tina, you mentioned about even the stress of going through IVF, the treatment. So, did either of you did you know about? Did you know that? I don't know. Like, I myself know it's stressful. You know, going through IVF. I know, you know, because of what I hear. So I guess did you almost like expect it, and if so, to what extent were you able to prepare mentally, or did anything help you to prepare mentally?
I mean, I just took it day by day. Like, I literally kind of just couldn't think too far into the future, although you do. And so I think, in a way, you know, because of other things that were kind of going on, I think we just sort of almost disconnected from the process. It was just this sort of process that we were going through. But back then, you know, it didn't even occur to me to, you know, seek out counselling or help to kind of go through that process. It just wasn't even on our radar to do that.
I think, going back to the point that Tina made before, not many people talk about doing IVF.
No.
I don't think a lot of people do know just the
Sure.
stress that goes through. And then I think when people are successful, they're so relieved that they just focus on the child. When people aren't successful, they don't really want to talk about the process.
Sure. Sure.
So I
Yeah.
think the reality is it's not talked about enough. You know, I think a lot of people go into it not really understanding the just how hard it can be, and you know, no one can tell you no one can give you a definite percentage, right? I mean, that's really hard. It's a case by case basis, but there is once we'd gone through it enough times and Tina had felt it, you know, we did make a decision not to keep on going, because actually the trauma and the stress related with it just wasn't worth it for the chance of success. And I think a lot of people do go into it. I mean, also the financial burden is significant. You know, as Tina said, we're privileged, but you know, I don't think we spent as much as someone told me they spent the other day, because I was like, wow, you know, the amount of money that some people have to invest because of their own circumstances is, you know, mind blowing. You know, it's a significant investment.
And those that can invest, you know, it just incredibly hard, if you're waiting for IVF as well, to even, you know, kind of get going on that journey. I mean, it's just so difficult. And I think, as you say, people just don't talk about it, and or they, of course, you know, you go into the process, and in some respects, you know, you have to think positively, and you have to think, I'm going through this to have a baby at the end, but that's not the reality for some people. And it's incredibly difficult for those going through IVF to see people like me that did go through it, and sadly, you know, didn't have a child at the end of it. You know, that is a really difficult thing to manage.
Sure, yeah. You know, you made a really good point as well, Daniele, because I think it was even just yesterday. If it wasn't yesterday, then it was the day before, when I read, and I'm not going to name the celebrity, they basically shared how they'd had quite a few rounds of IVF. They were unsuccessful, but then they then happened to have a child naturally. And you wouldn't, you would never have known. And it's only, and it makes you wonder, would they have shared that if they didn't have a child, you know?
It was a Kardashian, wasn't it? Wasn't it one of the Kardashians?
It was.
It was. I think they had
It
five.
was. It was.
Had 5 rounds actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
It was. You're right. You're 100% right. They wouldn't have talked. They wouldn't have talked about it.
Yeah. So it's something that people generally, and I can understand why, but it's not talked openly enough. And number one, it's a difficult topic to talk about, and therefore. That doesn't help, but it's so sensitive, so personal, so raw that people don't talk about it. And the few times it is shared, it's because it's a closed topic. So, for example, I might know of in my close circle someone who's going through it because they've shared with me, but it's not going to be public. Not that it should be public knowledge, but you know what I mean. It's not something that is openly talked about. And I guess if it is because there's a successful outcome at the end of it, then people would tend to, share. They're more likely to. Yeah.
I think they're more likely, but I don't think everyone does.
No.
It's not one of those natural things that you say, oh, it's a successful IVF. I mean, obviously, you know, I would say that I've kind of worked it out with a lot of people because they have twins. I mean, you know, when people have twins these days, you know, there's a high likelihood that it's IVF. But yeah, I'm not sure that everyone does, even then, does share it. I mean,
no, you're right. You're right. I mean,
why would that? I mean, to a certain extent, why would they? You know, you think it's like, it's just like, you know, it's kind of, you know, a child shouldn't be defined on whether they were IVF or not. So, to a certain extent, I can understand why you wouldn't necessarily share it.
So then, how did not having children affect your relationship, or even other relationships? So, like Tina, for example, you mentioned that those who go through IVF and they're successful in having a child, it can be awkward for those who haven't, and then there's that. It's difficult to manage, like you said. So, how did not having children affect your relationship and other relationships around you?
I mean, I can talk about, particularly with my friends who became pregnant. It's just such a weird feeling because you feel happy for them. I don't think, I've had any friends that sort of found it really easy to get pregnant, but I felt happy for them, but there is so much hurt there for me, and it never. I mean, now actually, when I have friends who still fall pregnant, I'm honestly happy for them, and it doesn't affect me in the same way that it did. But I think it has taken me a long time to be able to get to that place, and some work. But you know, I remember when my friends would tell me they were pregnant, it's like a kick in the, you know, a gut punch, that it just physically hurts. And you know, in some respects it can change friendships, but you know, like any relationship, you work at them. I what I do wish that I'd done is actually talked to my friends about how I was feeling, and you know, the advice that I would give for friends who are pregnant and have friends who are, you know, trying to conceive, is just to acknowledge that that you know it's hard for them. Just that acknowledgement, rather than pretending, you know, things are all good and rosy and ignoring the fact. I just wish that we talked about it more.
Sure. I guess, is it that elephant in the room kind of
Yeah,
scenario?
yeah.
Kind
It
of,
also
yeah.
goes back to society, because you reached out to me because I wrote that question on LinkedIn, right?
Yeah.
Which is that dreaded question, which is, do you have children? You know, which is a very triggering. I mean, it's not, you know, I don't think it's massively triggering for me, but I know it's triggering for Tina. So, you know, just hearing that question does just, you know, I do feel it, and I go, and I just think, why have we created a society where we think that's an okay question? Yeah, and we think that that's and it's always, it tends to be couples in the first place. And I've also got to be, you know, I have used the question, but more because I want to connect with people that haven't had children, right? I actually often
Okay.
I actually want them to say the answer's no, so I can straight
Right.
away say, I feel with you, we don't have kids either. So, you know, but, you know, I always have to be careful, because I am triggering them by asking that same question, but I'm slightly using it for a different reason. And I sit with it. So I've had to, even throughout this process, I have to think about when I use it, how I use it. But I'm definitely not using it. Um, you know, I'm using it because, Tina laughs because, you know, she's an introvert and I'm an extrovert. And, you know, I think the one thing I would say is, you know, when your friends have kids, you kind of lose some of them. You know, it's kind of like, I'll see you in 18 years, and there is,
Sure.
and again, I'd rather focus on the people that I think have done a wonderful job with us. So I think, you know, let me talk about who, you know, if you know someone that has gone through IVS and hasn't been successful, is, you know, one is being considerate, understanding them, but also making them part of your child's life. You know, that's what I would say that we actually have, and we do talk about it. You know, usually, and you know, if someone says to us, "Do you have kids?" I'll say, well, we have a life full of children, which we do. You know, I'm godfather. I can't even remember. Godfather to at least two. My godfather
Three.
three. I'm godfather to three. But also, you know, we've and it's really interesting if we look at the Nigerian culture. You know, you've got within your culture, you've got, you know, and I was, you know, one of my friends who's Nigerian, he'll call me his uncle. You know, but what's interesting now, I'm now starting to see that with our friends, that they won't call me, you know, won't be God. I'm not their godfather. I'm not their friend. I'm their kid's uncle. Doesn't matter whether they made me godfather or not. So,
Sure.
so all of a sudden, that kind of being part of that wider
Family.
family,
Yeah.
you know, so for me, we've gone away for Easter with the same group of people, you know, two of my best friends, and we've gone with their family. And you know, in all honesty, they feel like our family. You know, there's no, you know, for me, yes, there might not be a blood relation, but, you know, they've really embraced us. You know, and that allows us to, you know, spend time with those kids and be important to those kids, and, you know, that gives you that, you know, it's not quite the same sense of purpose, but it does give you an element of purpose, you know, in order to, you know, be there as a support function for other children.
I think the thing that I would add to that is that, you know, when our friends included us in their kids' lives, that's what we wanted. There are people within the childless community that will just find it too difficult to do that. So, you know, it should be led by the person and not You know, allowing that space for them to come to you, but just don't stop inviting them to things, which is what, you know, can happen. Is like, oh, well, actually, you know, they don't have kids. They're not going to want to come to our kid's birthday party. Well, actually, they might, but they might not. It's their choice. Just keep inviting them.
You know, Daniele, you mentioned about, and this came through in your LinkedIn post about not ask, or being thoughtful when you ask someone, do you have kids, because of it perhaps being triggering. So what would you say then, like, what would you say is how would people who are interested in finding out, because it is a natural question to ask, especially if someone's of a certain age or if they're a couple, what would you say they should, or is it the delivery, how they say it? What would your advice be?
That question. I hate to. Listen, I'm going to say something really controversial, but so often kids, the only people that kids are interesting to are those around them. So I actually think using kids as your first frame of reference is quite lazy anyway. I would actually just make it more, what's your passions in life? Or what did you get up to last weekend? Because what you do is you end up finding, you know, and it's really tough. Listen, it's really tough for parents. You know, I'm sitting here going, you know, you lose a friend for 18 years, but they also lose you for 18 years. You know, there's that element. I did a panel recently on male friendship and how hard it is for fathers, specifically in terms of staying connected with their friends. So, you know, I think the reality is being a parent is really hard. And so I think if you said, you know, what do you do for fun? What are your passions? What did you do last weekend? What are you doing coming out on holiday? Kids will naturally come into the conversation then. You know, they can talk about their lives, what their lives are like. And so all of a sudden they can bring that in a way that's actually, you know, I'm genuinely interested in what they want to do. And so when they ask us that question and kids doesn't come up with the answer, we don't have to, you know, even think about whether we've got kids or not. So I think for me, it's just understanding, just make asking, you know, more open, more considerate, more interesting questions. Do you have kids is not a very interesting question.
Sure. It kind of reminds me of, oh gosh, like I'm seeing a lot of synergies here with, and I know it's not exactly the same, just I guess in terms of being a single person and not being married, and someone who is, let's just say, married and got kids. You know, there's a lot of, you know, like in terms of your friendship groups, they kind of change to your network being other single, you know, people, and you know, that kind of stuff. So I am seeing the synergies here, and just in terms of feeling that there is a difference, you know, between the two camps, if I can call it that. You know,
there's a massive difference. I mean, our new friends don't tend to have kids. I mean, that's the reality, and you do gravitate towards people that don't have kids.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had a situation, not so, I don't know what it is, but we meet people that don't have kids, and within 6 months they seem to get pregnant, and it's kind of like, okay, we've lost those friends again. and the reality is we do. I mean, it's too new a relationship to expect us to be important to them when they have kids. So, you know, I think it is a reality. It's why we, you know, a lot of our new friends, and again, we do know that, you know, gay men can have kids, but a lot of the gay men that we know don't. So, you know, to a certain extent, I think what's been nice is it has opened up new types of relationships, new types of people in our lives. But let's not, you know, as I said, a lot of my close friends are still in our lives. They're just in our lives less.
Or differently.
Yeah.
Sure. So, like, what kind of, like, did you get any? So, like, Tina, you mentioned how it didn't even cross your mind. It wasn't on your radar to get counselling. So, what kind of help or support did you both or individually get along the way, or what have you found to be helpful and supportive to you?
So as part of the fertility clinic that we did our first round of IVF with, when I miscarried, you could have one free counselling session. And it just totally put me off because they took me into a room that had all of the photos of the babies that had been born in the clinic in the room, which you can imagine was incredibly triggering for me. So that was my first experience of counselling. So I didn't go back to it. I think, in all honesty, we kind of went through that whole process, kind of dealing with it in our own way, and just kind of getting on with it, disassociating from it to a certain extent. And it wasn't until I started a foundation in psychotherapy and counselling, and that's the one thing that I focused on. And I wrote an essay basically on childlessness. And actually, it really helped me kind of heal through that process. I think the other thing that I started to do, mainly when I knew that we weren't going to continue, that we'd kind of made the decision that, right, this is it now, I did start to look into some of the networks that are out there, of which the one in particular that I looked and became a member of was Gateway Women, started by Jodie Day, who is she's pretty much the founder of the childless movement, for many years, and that really helped. And what that helped me understand was how powerful being seen is. Because I felt what I was going through, what we were going through, was so invisible because we don't talk about it, that when I entered a network where I was reading all of these different experiences where I could see myself in them, it made me feel less alone. And never ever underestimate the power of being seen. And that's why I chose to, once I'd written my essay, was actually to write a blog post about my experience, so that in one way, it was being seen again. People could understand the experience that we'd been through.
And if you got show notes, we should definitely send you Tina's blog post, because it's
I was just making a note to jot that down. Yeah.
It's a beautiful story, and I think the reality is, we've also, because of I'm sure I can share this, but Tina going through the menopause and elements around that, we've been doing couples counselling, and I think it's also got us to talk about it a bit more. But even before this session, Tina wanted to go through the questions between us first and talk about stuff. But to be honest with you, I don't know where I am on my grief journey, because I've never really grieved. So, but I've had quite a few people telling me I probably do need to go to therapy. But I watched a film, what was it, 2 months ago, called Nowhere Special. Nowhere Special. And it even just it's getting me now. And it was with All Fathers, and it was me, because I do a lot of work within the masculinity and the male space. And it literally broke me. I can't, just now I can tell. And so I don't know how much of that was losing my brother, and he was the guy. It's just such a hard story. Ooh, you can tell my emotion. But it's about guys dying of a brain tumour. My brother died of a brain tumour, who has to find someone to adopt his son.
Right.
It is such a wonderful, it's one of those really weird films that, it's just so you can tell the impact it had on me and quite a lot of the other men there, actually. It was actually done by a good friend of ours called Patrick, part of the Mandem. So which is started by Francis Augusto, and I think for me, just seeing, for me, the power of just seeing those men together, watching a film like that, talking about it and talking about being fathers, it was, for me, it was beautiful. But at the same time, I probably do need to do a bit more therapy myself and explore it. But, that's the reality. This stuff stays with you, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, it's interesting, but I do resonate with what you're saying. Just because, like, I guess on a day to day level, I tend to think I'm okay. But then when there's certain topics that comes up, especially when it comes to bereavement, I realize, oh my gosh, I'm not okay. I'm not altogether on this, as I thought. So you're right in terms of it stays with you, but it's just suppressed. And it's only every now and again it might come out of the box, if you let it. Unless you intentionally go out, and for example to explore through counselling, etc. Yeah, it's something that I've noticed even for myself. So what were you going to say, Tina?
Yeah, what I was going to just add to that is that the thing about childless grief is that it's not something that you can see. It's not like it's a different grief to maybe one of your relations dying, because
Sure.
people will know that person. But when you're grieving something that you wanted but haven't managed to have in your life, it's a really difficult grief to understand. And going back to Jodie Day again, she does you can find it on YouTube, a talk about disenfranchised grief and how society kind of looks at disenfranchised grief. And again, it was like, when I listened to it, I was like, wow, I can really see myself in this, because it's something that, you're just grieving something that you've never had and never will have. So yeah, it can be complicated.
But you say you never had, but I think the reality, is a difference in that, for Tina it was physical, the grief is different. I think for me, the bit so I think, I can't remember which one it was, but when you had an ectopic pregnancy, which she had to have removed. And do you know what? In all of this, the thing that I remember the most is sitting there in Paddington and waiting, going, why haven't I had a call? Why haven't I had a call? And going, and the doctor asked me to sit down. That's what I remember, is the doctor sitting me down and saying, Tina's lost a lot of blood, but we've managed to save her. That's, so for me, actually, in the whole process, Tina's here. So there's an element of me going, do you know what? That was the bit that for me was the most horrendous, because it's not, and I've always, and it's been hard for Tina. I've never, I've had a very, because I could, because it's not, that's my privilege. It's not in my body. Until anything existed, it didn't exist in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for Tina, it was very different. And so, that's something we've had to both be understanding for each other, because we've had very different experiences.
And what, can I come back to almost like the role of gender when it comes to someone who may be affected when it comes to childlessness, because there is that, let me call it perception, but I think it's a general understanding that women are far more impacted than men, or there's that prejudice around gender, basically. So I guess in particular to you, Daniele, just your thoughts in terms of like how.
I think there are lots of men that grew up thinking that their purpose in life was to have a child,
Right.
and I wouldn't never want to minimise the impact on them of that. So yes, there is the physical element, but where you believe your purpose is to be a parent, I don't think it matters what gender you are. The impact is the same. And if anything, it's more likely, because we know that the father, one, won't necessarily talk about it, but also if they did talk about it, probably wouldn't be believed in the same extent, exactly to your point. But I definitely know of situations where fathers have just, if for them they've had just as much, and I don't know, but I'm guessing, the people that do, I don't know how many fathers are on the childlessness community, but I'm guessing there's not that many, and if they are, they feel in the out group, and so it's much harder for them.
There are groups now for men. I think that men are beginning to have a voice, which is only a positive thing. Because again, it's that, being seen in different experiences, it can make you feel less alone in it. And yeah, I mean, the gender, I think in one respect for me, understanding where Daniele was in the process actually took some pressure off to a certain extent. I kind of knew that our relationship would be okay, whatever happened. That's not the case for everyone. And I think, we have to recognise that. And I think we also have to look at the spectrum of, the gender spectrum now for people who are non-binary or trans going through these experiences. It can be, really difficult because, it's not recognised within their communities. So I think, it's difficult for anyone going through who wanted a child at the end of the process.
And even the very fact that you're here and you're talking about what we've been saying all throughout, that it's not talked about openly, or certainly not enough. How did you actually get to this point? I don't know if we'd started recording, Tina, but you kind of said, I think you said early on about how it's still, you're still getting there. It's still a journey. So, but you've obviously got to a certain point enough to share even about your own experience, and that's let me just call it progress. That tells me something about where you're at in that journey. So how did you get to this point of being maybe more able to talk about it, for example? And I would say that to you as well, Daniele, the fact that you put a post out on LinkedIn, that got my attention, and I don't see that kind of sharing in an open space often. So how did you get to that point where you thought, you know what, I'm gonna say this? And was there a turning point? Was there a milestone, individually or as a couple, that made you think, yeah, you're at that place where you are more able, to talk openly?
Yeah, I think for me, and this is something else that is not talked about. In fact, I haven't actually heard it talked about ever. We'd gone through 2 rounds of IVF, and we had some frozen embryos. I think we had 4 frozen embryos, which meant that obviously we could have, probably another 1 or 2 or 3 attempts, past that. And I think, because of the traumatic experience that I'd gone through, and then we kind of took some time, and I just said, look, I just want a break. I can't go into it another 6 months down the line. I just need a break. And I think by this point I was probably, 45, maybe 46. But we kept our embryos frozen because even though in my heart, I knew I couldn't do another round. Every year we used to get a letter from the fertility clinic, and you pay for the storage. What would you like to do with your embryos? Would you like to keep them in storage? Would you like to destroy them? Would you like to put them into research? And we kept them on storage on ice for probably like another 5 years, because that was like another grieving process all over again. Like to actually tick a box to say, for me, now this is where I'm going to get emotional, that, you know, that's us done, and I'm destroying or putting our embryos into research was just such a hard decision. So I just didn't want to go through that grieving process again. Sure. But then what did help me, and I couldn't, you know, I said to Daniele, I'm ready, but I couldn't tick the box. And so, you know, he ticked the box and he just quietly posted the letter, because I just couldn't physically do it. And I think it was at that point then, you know, we started to reorganize our lives. We took an amazing sabbatical and we traveled South America
for 4 months.
For 4 months.
It's amazing.
And I always remember my boss saying to me, the wonderful Dale, this is your experience. You know, some people experience motherhood. You're going to experience something new in your travels, and that was just such a amazing thing to hear. It was just another life experience that we were going to experience together. And then obviously the work past then was writing the essay, the blog post, our own therapy. I became a volunteer for Childline, so that I still had kind of children in my life that I knew that, you know, I was, well, I would hope making a difference. So all of those things for me personally is, but that has been over a period of, you know, quite a few years.
And I think you know, so I've because of the work that I do in inclusion, equity, and diversity, you know, I do a lot of inclusive leadership training. So, you know, the reality was, if anyone follows me on LinkedIn, they know I'm extremely vulnerable. But this was probably the last big vulnerability, because I knew this one wasn't about me. This one was about us. So I had to show all the other vulnerability first, I think, before Tina just went. And she wrote, and you know, it's my piece. It goes out under my name, but to be honest, Tina wrote most of it, because, you know, I wrote it, and, you know, we wrote it together. So I think for me that's really important. I think you know, listen, you know, it's really weird, because on the other side, I think it has given, you know, I do think there's a responsibility on us to do stuff, make change. It's why I do what I do. But also I think the best compliment I did get from someone, I think they meant it, you know, it could have, I think they said it to Tina, she wouldn't have felt so nice, but to me it was, you know, they said, you're the best advert for people that don't have kids. You know, and I think you need adverts for people that don't have kids, because I don't think, you know, I think part of the challenge that, you know, Tina feels the way she did is because of the pressures, you know, that society puts on. And so for me, anything that takes that pressure off, that actually says, you know what, there is another way to be very, very happy and not have kids, I think that's also important.
So you've kind of just talked about or mentioned about, you know, things that could be done to take that, let's call it that shame, that secrecy, you know, to kind of like dispel that. So what more do you think could be done? So for example, we know that there are, well, in some workplaces, depending on, you know, geographical location, there are things like parental bereavement leave, or those kind of things. What else as a society could be done so that you are not you are, as a couple, are not the ad, but it's more widespread, if that makes sense. There are more widespread, I don't know, actions, initiatives, things that could be done so it's not such a big deal.
I think that there is, for hundreds of years, the way that women, particularly without children, are portrayed in the media, in films, and they're always the psychotic person or the Disney witch, or demonized, almost demonized by society. The matriarchal witches that were back hundreds of years ago were, they were demonized. And I think, to the point that Daniele was making about, these positive role models that you have, and it's not just childless. We do have people actually that are child free, and they choose to be child free. I mean, we're childless not by choice, but you have people that are child free. Until we see those positive role models in the media and in films, and I don't think that society will change. We live in a pronatalist society.
I mean,
until that changes, I'm not sure how.
I mean, just look at the Barbie movie. Everyone talks about how feminist it was and what a wonderful movie, and it ends with her going to the gynecologist. And you're like going, okay, what's that saying? What's that saying in terms of people's purpose? I think for me, we've just got to look at the world is moving. So, I run something called Authors Anonymous. Emma Gannon's on it, and she wrote a book called Olive. Emma does talk about the pressure that, as someone that has chosen not to have children, the pressure that she gets put on her the whole time. So I think having more role models of people speaking openly about that choice. And what we are seeing is we're seeing a whole generation coming through who, because of the climate, are making that decision. So I think there will be a shift, but I think as exactly what Tina said, we have to be mindful, because the workplace is a really difficult one, I'll be honest, because I remember when I used to leave, and I called I've always had pet projects, and I always call them my baby. And I'd leave for work, I'd leave early, like I say early, I left at 5:30, and people would judge me for it. But then a parent goes to leave at 5:30, and then it's like, oh, they're going to see their kid. But the reality is, I'm not going to sit here and go, single people need some more support at work, because work is so, the barriers for primary caregivers in work is so high. I mean, it's, people who are primary caregivers, it's so hard for them in the workplace. I don't want, for me, the focus still needs to be on supporting them, because it is so hard to have a child and be that primary caregiver. But
I think there is an element of respecting people's time. My time is no less valuable than someone who has children. I have things that I like to do that are important to me. It doesn't mean that I should compromise my time, and feel lesser than because I don't have kids.
Of course, yeah. So I was going to ask about advice that you would give to people, let's just say friends, family, who are trying to support those who wants to have children but doesn't have children. So, for example, there's some people that are less skilled, when it comes to giving support, and there are people that want to help or support in whatever way they can, but they don't know how to, and sometimes when you don't know how to, you say nothing, and sometimes saying nothing creates that elephant in the room. So what kind of advice would you give to people, whether they're a friend or a family member or a colleague, who are trying to support someone but they don't really know how to, or they are supporting in the way that they think they should be supporting, but they don't know if they are supporting effectively. What kind of advice would you give to anyone who's listening but is in that position?
I would give the same advice I give for any other situation. I'm going to give you an example. I heard of in the work that I do, I heard of an example of someone was experiencing Ramadan and would come out and everyone gone lunch. No one was at their desk having lunch like they normally do, because they decided that actually the best thing to do was not to eat in front of them, and he just felt completely kind of left out. And so for me, the advice is really simple. Everyone needs support. Ask them what support they need.
Sure. It's good to talk.
It's just good to just say, I know you're going through stuff that must be really hard. I really feel with you. What support can I give you? And sometimes people might, I'm fine. I don't need support. And that's when you might want to go dig a bit deeper, work out what they're actually going through, and sometimes just make suggestions. So, would it be helpful if? So that kind of culture intelligence to understand what they might be going through might just take someone over the edge of just doing something. So I think for me, I don't think it's more than just saying what kind of support should I give you, because often people will go no support. And again, I think it's the same. I've seen it in grief, right? If someone's grieving and you say, what can I do to support you? They'll say, no, I'm absolutely fine. They're not fine. So you then go, okay, how about we go for a walk in the park? Would you like, and then all of a sudden you go, oh yeah, I love that. So it's just thinking a bit more around what they might be going through and what might be helpful, so that you've always got that second follow-up question, which when they invariably, some of them people go, this is exactly what you could do, support me. But when they say, don't just walk away, when they say, no, I'm absolutely fine.
Sure.
Because no one ever really is absolutely fine, and everyone can do with a bit more support.
Yeah, I think the thing that I would add just on top of that, because again, we sort of work in the same industry, is also you can educate yourself around some of the experiences. So it just kind of builds a bit of empathy. It's not like every experience is going to be the same, but you can, there are lots of, Jodie Day is someone, she wrote a book, Living the Life Unexpected. Just educating yourself about some of the experiences that people will go through, I think, can build some empathy and understanding.
Thank you. And I'm going to end with this question, which is, what would you say to someone who is going through a similar situation and they're perhaps not as far in that journey as you are now? What would you say to them, especially if they're struggling? Yeah.
I wish that I'd got help a bit sooner. I felt alone through the process, and it is a very lonely place. I wish that I had got help, and don't well, it's very easy to say don't be too hard on yourself, but really trying to take things step by step, day by day. It's not easy. It's never going to be an easy journey, but if you can get some support and try to look after yourself through it, then hopefully it will be something that I don't like the term come to terms with, but live with and find joy again.
And I think just to add in terms of, and again, not everyone going through IVF is in a couple, but for those that are in couples, I actually would say that everyone should go through being couples therapy during it. Yeah, I mean, if you don't need couples therapy because you communicate, great. But there's, I actually say this to all my friends that are married now. anyone that's married, before they get married, I would say the same thing. And again, I think it's the same in a couple going through something like this. I don't know whether you've seen the film. You can tell I love film because I watch a lot of film. But I always tell people they have to watch the film Marriage Story because it's the most heartbreaking film, because there's two people that you can tell love each other deeply, but at certain points in their lives, they just do not communicate properly. And it means them doing a part. And I think it's the same. It's the same when you go through something as difficult as IVF. You have to communicate the whole way through.
Thank you so much, Tina and Daniele. You've been very open. You've made yourself vulnerable, and I know it's all to the good of people who need to hear this, because like we've said, this isn't really talked about openly much, and so the more that we do this kind of stuff, the better. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you for asking us, and thank you for being such a wonderful host.
Oh.